going out and waving your flag, it's a big sense of responsibility, because you know what happens when you do that? You're representing to all the people who are afraid to march who they could be. And a lot of people, they want to be that person. And for me, that's why I do this, even though I have my weirdness around, being on here in this context, right? Hey guys, it's Kat, and it's time for yet another episode of True Tea. I wanted to thank you guys so much for tuning in yet again to watch me ramble on about whatever the hell's on my mind. If you're brand new here, what we like to do on this channel is learn, share, and grow through education and conversation. Sometimes my videos are conversational and rambly like this one, and sometimes they're scripted and educational. So if you're into that sort of thing, if you like, if you're the sort of person who likes to leave paragraph upon paragraph of comment, this is the channel for you. If you like long videos, this is the channel for you. I know some people complain about how long my videos are, but you know what, girl? It's just tough titty Miss Kitty, because this series is really something that I've come to love. And I really want to thank you guys for continuing to show up every single week, leaving a thoughtful comment that makes me think. I've been trying to get into a habit of permanently approving certain users who leave comments, y'all who come every single week, because approving comments is sometimes kind of exhausting, even though I love reading all my comments. So yeah, as usual, I always want your brew, and this is gonna be no different. So yeah, we're gonna be having a conversation that's gonna be quite interesting. I wanted to give a shout out to It Gets Better for sending me this pride flag. I've never owned one of these flags, so thank you so much. But we're gonna be having a conversation about pride. So before we get into this, I would highly suggest, as I usually do, to go to your kitchen and grab yourself something to drink. Now, because I'm classy and more rich than you, I'm drinking Carlos Rossi. I'm officially part of the Rossi posse. It just is what it is. I don't know what to tell you. We're just having a good old time here with Rossi today. I've got a date with Rossi tonight, anyway. Let me drink a little bit of this and let's jump into this conversation. So, like I said, I wanted to do a video about Pride because this is Pride Month, and I've always had complicated feelings, not only about this month, but Pride in general. So I wanted to kind of have an open conversation about Pride, and I'm really curious what you guys have to say about this, because this is something that, I don't know, it's just always been on my mind around this time of month. Because if you've watched my last video, I'm trans, but I'm not queer. You guys can watch that video right up here. I have a lot of complicated feelings about, being a member of the LGBT community. So I thought this would be an interesting time to have those conversations. Now, disclaimer, because we always have to do one, this is going to be a rambly video. I know some of you guys don't like my rambly videos. I don't know what to tell you, I don't know why you're here, but this is gonna be a rambly video because these are a lot of thoughts that I'm just having off the top of my head, and I really wanted to start a dialogue. And sometimes with True Tea, that's what I like to do. I like to sort of just present to you a topic that's on my mind and see where it goes, because I have a lot of different feelings and thoughts about certain things, and sometimes it helps me to, bounce them off of you guys. You guys are always so fun and helpful. So Pride, let's talk about Pride. Now, when I thought about talking about Pride, I really started to think a lot about my YouTube channel. And I know that I've been referencing my YouTube channel a lot because I've been a YouTuber for over 10 years. I started my YouTube channel when I was 15 years old. This channel I started when I was 20. I've been on YouTube since I was a babe. I was a little baby, very insecure, not sure of where they were gonna go, not sure of who they were. And YouTube was really, in so many ways, where I was able to sort of cultivate my identity. Now, what some of you guys might not know, because I was a high school YouTuber, right? I really wasn't, I didn't want anyone to know about my YouTube channel. I was going through so many weird changes in life that I just didn't want anyone to see it. And part of the reason why I started a YouTube channel, ironically enough, is because it was so much away from the Zangas. Shout out if you know Zanga. Let me know in the comment box if you guys remember Zanga. The Zangas, the MySpace and things that I had my friends on. This was sort of more of a personal space, back then, back in 2005, I thought to myself, who's gonna watch YouTube? Because YouTube wasn't that big of a deal, right? YouTube was not what it is today. So for me, I was definitely really nervous but excited to sort of have a YouTube presence and sort of cultivate, a small following. And I really did have a quite small following, right? So if you come to my talks, you guys know this story already, but I was a little high school YouTuber, and my old YouTube channel was just me kind of talking about my day. It was mostly me talking about wanting to go to Cal Arts and the journey that I was going through with that. But sometimes, occasionally, it was me being a little messy, a little messy, talking about things that like were going on at school, the girl that I didn't like, the guy that was annoying, the person that, gave me too much homework, it was just all the stuff that you would talk about when you're a teenager. And if you've ever recorded your life as a teenager, if you ever blogged or whatever, you ever read that back and you're just like, why? Was that so important to me? Like the things that are so important to you back then are so silly to you now, but as a teenager, it's all so serious, right? And so the story usually goes that, I was sort of popular in school or whatever. I don't want to brag or whatever, but I was kind of popular in school. And I always thought that it was because, I was in theater, and I went to a sort of a weird high school where you kind of had the inverse of what a lot of people experience. A lot of people, they go to college or high school rather, and you're popular if you're a jock, you're popular if you're a cheerleader. But this was sort of an academic school. So all the smart kids were, all the smart kids were the popular kids and things like that. And not that I wasn't a smart kid, but I definitely was like super tunnel vision into getting into Cal Arts. And so some of my academics suffered, even though I never really got bad grades, maybe in math. I was never good at math, but I never really got bad grades, right? And so when I started to recognize that I was popular, I thought that it was because, I was a theater kid and maybe they saw, my solo in Once Upon a Mattress, or, maybe my solo in Beauty and the Beast, or, maybe my solo in Fiddler on the Roof, or they might have caught my solo in Hello Dolly. But it turns out that they weren't. It turns out that everyone was watching my YouTube channel. Now you can only imagine how mortified I was, 15 years old, understanding that everyone at school knew who I was because they were watching my YouTube channel. I was talking shit. So it was like, okay, that's why that girl doesn't want to talk to me anymore. Now she totally saw the video, the 20-minute rant I made about her. It makes sense and understands. But I've always had this sort of nervousness around my YouTube channel. And part of that was because I was going through a lot of stuff in terms of my sexuality and my gender and things like that. I've discussed in previous videos that I used to identify as genderqueer. That was a really big part of who I was for a very long time. And as I discussed in my last True Tea video, being genderqueer was really about being out there and being radical and queering spaces and destroying this idea of gender that was so binary and here or there. And as I discussed in my last video, there's a little video up here again, I'll put it back up here. For me, really, my lack of claiming queerness really boils down to just being honest with myself and recognizing that I don't really, I'm trans, okay, yes, but in every other way, I'm fairly normative. Maybe I'm goth or whatever, most of the time, but like, I'm not really, I don't feel comfortable claiming queerness as a person who is assimilated into a very binary idea of a gender and has done so comfortably and is not constantly challenging people in terms of what, you know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like I am that radical queer teen that I was when I was younger. So today I feel a lot of weirdness around being part of LGBT communities or even being in LGBT spaces, because if I'm being real, and I know that this is something that's hard for some people to accept or embrace or understand or wrap their heads around, I'm a straight girl. Okay, I'm a straight girl who most people assume is cisgender, and that has really colored the way that I navigate through this world. And so with that all being said, pride as a concept has been very interesting to me. Now, someone left a comment in my last video that was like, Kat is the kind of person who will hear somebody, someone will ask her a stupid question and she'll spend like an hour explaining it. And that is 100% the sort of person that I am. I will hear somebody say something silly and stupid especially in my comments section, and be like, let's make a video about it, which is why I have to stop myself from making video responses. Watch this video up here about video responses. I just have to stop myself because I will literally continue to do this. This will never end. So I sometimes have to pull myself away and come back to reality and stop being so invested in some of these conversations. But, someone commented in one of my videos, one of the videos where I was talking about this video up here about how passing complicated my dating life as a trans woman. And they basically left the comment that I wasn't very proud of myself, that I didn't really like myself. You know, you say you always love yourself, but you don't really. And this has kind of always been a point of contention for me because, you know, I understand this being somebody who had a very radical queer mindset when I was younger. There is this sort of idea that if you are a trans person who, quote, passes, right, or is read as cis, right? If you're a trans person in that situation and you don't call it out, you're not constantly drawing attention to your gender, you're not constantly drawing attention to your transness, that translates to shame. So how can you say that you are a proud, you know, trans person if ultimately what ends up happening is you are too ashamed to claim your gender? And I hear that. I do understand where people come from when they say that. But to be honest with you guys, when I was thinking about that, it kind of connected with a lot of other things that I think about when it comes to me. You know, I mentioned in one of my videos recently, and I'm not going to get into this, don't expect a video about this, but you know, I think a lot and I'm a little paranoid, and I have like this burgeoning like transhumanist thought process a little bit. And within that, it brings to question, for me, how relevant is my shell? How relevant is this in comparison to this, right? And when I say that, it's not because I'm trying to differentiate myself from my shell, but it's understanding that I have a consciousness that is independent of my body. And one of the things that I started to think about when I you know, was really thinking about that is, I guess what pride has been for me is sort of accepting the aspects of my body and being proud of them in a world that often tells me that I shouldn't be, in a world that often says you're not supposed to be, you know, happy as a trans person. You're not supposed to be thriving and feminine and all these other things as a Black woman. You know, these things that are projected onto me that I'm constantly having to navigate around, and sort of being able to go through that and say, you know what, I love me, and so what, tough titty Miss Kitty. You know, and that's kind of something I've been thinking a lot about, is like, how much of my pride is just me surviving in a society that doesn't really want me to thrive? And I'm not saying that to be like, oh, woe is me, or oh my gosh, you know, because girl, if there's one thing you guys, if you haven't picked up on this by now, I'm the sort of person who does not like sympathy. I don't like, you know, I don't like people feeling sorry for me. And honestly, that is a very big part of the pride that I have. I'm a very proud person. I'm a very, 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 very proud person. So proud to the point where it's actually been sort of hard for me to be transparent. And it's been hard for me to actually acknowledge that I have flaws, or that I'm hurt, or that I need help. That's been a really big issue in my life, is that I'm just too goddamn proud to actually express vulnerability, which is part of why True Tea has been so important to me. True Tea in this iteration has been so important to me because as I've gone through different sort of stages with my YouTube channel and me as a person and my personal life and things like that, I've started to arrive to this point with my YouTube stuff where I'm really comfortable talking about who I actually am, where I'm comfortable telling you guys about all the dark shit that I've been involved in, all the bad shit that I've tried to not acknowledge. I'm at that point in my life where I like myself enough to know that if I told you guys these stories and you guys didn't like them, that at the end of the day, I am still who I am and I still like who I am, right? And so for me, True Tea, even though I know some of y'all have heard these stories before, telling the stories in the way that I've told these stories has really been important to me because, again, I went through a process when I was younger where I wanted no one to know my YouTube channel. You know, when I made my video about, you know, you left to being so white, some people interpreted that as me not, you know, being upset that I didn't have enough subscribers, right? I would never feel that way because I've often throughout my life done this thing where I sabotage my YouTube channel. I never wanted to be a prominent YouTuber. Like I said, I started my YouTube channel wanting a small following of people who, you know, could sort of listen to these videos of me bitching and moaning and sort of give me advice. That's what I wanted. I did not want to be a YouTuber. And so in a lot of ways, where I am now in life is such a random thing because I did have a very strong path in life, but I just am where I am now. That is just, you know, I just am in this position that I didn't expect to be. And I'm sort of just going with the flow and it's been working out really well so far. You know, like I said, I mean, I didn't want to say this because it sounds really mean or whatever, but like, I know some people are like, oh, you're complaining because you don't have success. Girl, I'm successful. I know I may be very humble, but I'm successful. I've been a full-time YouTuber since 2014. So, you know. Anyway, basically what I'm saying is like, I'm becoming more and more proud of the work that I'm creating. And I think you guys can kind of see that, where I'm becoming more proud of the work that I'm creating. Right. But also with that comes this other thing where, you know, when I was 15, I had this expectation of nobody watching my YouTube channel. I had this expectation of no one knowing who I was. Right. But now I've got, you know, 160,000 subscribers on YouTube. I live in Los Angeles, and there's really nowhere I go without someone at some point saying, oh my God, are you Kat Blaque? Like, it happens every time, every place I go. And I've had to sort of, I guess, become more and more comfortable with that. And I guess for me, that brings into question pride. Now, I talked about sabotaging my YouTube channel. I want to go back to that really quickly, since we were kind of starting with the through line of my YouTube channel. One of the big reasons why I didn't want to be known on YouTube was because I didn't want people to know that I was trans. I've talked about this in the past, but a big goal of mine in life was, for a certain point, to be stealth. Now, and this is something I wish some people understood. I'm 28 years old. Keep in mind, I started reading a lot of queer theory and stories about transness when I was like 13, 14, 15. A lot of the stories that I read growing up when it came to trans women and their futures and their existences and things like that, a lot of them had a very similar sort of, you know, story, plot line rather, where, you know, I found out that I was transgender. I recognized it. Someone gave me pills on the black market. I started getting pumped. You know, I started going to these surgeons. I had the surgery. I killed everybody that ever knew me, that had ever known me before I transitioned. I moved to another state, and now I'm sitting on the front porch, you know, of my white picket fence house, and I'm writing this to you. I've got a husband, 2.5 kids, and a dog, and my life is just so perfect, and nobody knows that I'm transgender, right? I mean, all of that, with the exception of like the killing someone part, that was part of what trans life was. You didn't transition to be seen. You didn't transition to be celebrated as a trans person. You didn't transition for people to know that you were trans. You transitioned so that people didn't know that you're trans. And for many transgender people, that was a attempt at survival in a society that didn't love them, right? For a lot of people, that was trying to make it through in a time where if you were trans, there was no path for you. And as we sort of get further and further in this, you know, conversation about transness, people do now have options. People do now have places they can go and things they can do and protections legally. And that does change the way that we talk about these things. It does really change the way that we talk about these things. But I thought to myself when I was thinking about the concept of pride, are those women who transition to stealth, are they not proud of themselves, right? Or do they not have pride because part of them surviving and part of them thriving was not associating with trans people, right? And it made me think about my own little stint being stealth. And I'll say that for me, when I eventually did reach stealth, I will be honest and say that there was shame. You know, the opposite of pride is shame. For me, I definitely felt shameful of my transness. I would do a lot of things where I would sort of intentionally dance around it, wouldn't quite talk about it. You know, I would really sort of like not really acknowledge my transness at all, because again, that was part of my survival. You know, when I was younger and I would go and apply for jobs, I would walk into these places of employment and I would write down my legal name and I would write down my legal gender and I would fill out the application, but I would look like this. And there were so many times where after I handed somebody my paperwork, they would laugh at me. Or I would turn around and I would walk out and they would laugh at me because they didn't know that I was trans, but my paperwork said that I was. And so for me, I internalized that a lot and I said to myself, if I'm gonna survive in this world, I have to be stealth. I have to change my name. I have to change my gender marker. I have to do all these things in order to survive. And you know, I've talked about this before on my channel, but personally for me, my story was once I changed those two things, those two little things, I never found myself having the conversation ever again. And it was kind of bizarre because I guess when I was in my younger, more radical queer space, I kind of thought that this would always be something to discuss. This would always be something to talk about. But what ended up happening is because I changed my ID, I was never explaining why my ID said this, but I looked like that. Because I changed my name, I was never having these conversations about how, yeah, my name is this, but I'm actually this, right? And that just made it so that naturally, I just never talked about being transgender, right? And so it's one of these weird things now where I'm not in a space anymore where I'm ashamed of being trans. I'm not in a space anymore where I'm not comfortable claiming my transness, but also it's not something that I feel I need to bring up a lot. And for some people, I know that comes off as being shameful and not having pride, right? And so I guess for me, what I really wanted to sort of ask you guys is, what does pride look like for you? What does pride mean to you? Because I think that this is part of a larger conversation where I know this sounds so cliche, and I know that this sounds like everyone says this and it's kind of, whatever, but labels are for sandwiches. For me, it's like I have labels that I claim, I'm trans, I'm polyamorous, I'm, kinky, I'm a feminist, I'm humanist. I have all these different labels that I do apply to myself. But I guess for me, as I get older, I think about who are we as people? How do we associate with each other? How do we talk with each other? For me, that's the most important part. As I kind of discussed in my, YouTube being so, not that one video, but my dating and politics video, for me, just because of my difference, I find that I often have to talk about the many labels that people would project onto me. I mean, I go to so many spaces where people are trying to have some weird conversation with me about their Black friend, okay? And and even though I'm Black and I love that about myself, if I were to choose a robotic body to put my consciousnness in, she would be Black, she would be thick, she would have 4C hair, okay? Maybe she'd have bigger boobs, maybe she, maybe she'd be a little thicker or whatever. But I love this about myself. I love all of this, right? But I guess because of maybe, I don't want to say our climate, because of maybe where we are, me being present in certain spaces, people got to talk about my race. People have to talk about it. It's a point of conversation. And in some spaces, when people know that I'm trans, same thing. They've got to talk about it. They've got to focus on it. And so even though I say that these labels aren't that important to me, and these are things that I have pride in, for me, I guess when I think to myself, as I'm on my own, in my consciousness, how important is that stuff? How important is that? And maybe for me, a lot of that stuff isn't very important because of my privilege. I don't know. But I wonder, I guess what I'm really trying to ask is, as society moves to a point of full acceptance, right? As society moves to a point where we're not really giving a fuck about what race you are, what gender you are, what your sexuality is, what will pride mean? Because for me, I know I feel a lot of pride. Like I said, it's been an obstacle in my life in many different ways. But does pride for a lot of people, does it mean going out? Does it mean picking up a rainbow flag and waving it? And when it comes to stuff like this, I've talked in the past about how I don't really feel comfortable at Pride. And the reasons why I don't feel comfortable at Pride is because I'm a straight girl, and I even feel weird being there in an allied context, because all I find myself doing is asking why none of this is for me. We're not gonna get into that in this video. Maybe I'll make another video about that. I've talked about it before, but oftentimes when I've gone to Pride, and I've only gone twice in my life, I've just found myself being okay, so where there's a language that you've become used to as a straight person, and when you go to a gay space, it's that doesn't exist. It's not there. And so it's really odd for me sometimes to be in those spaces because I'm just used to a certain language. But anyway, when it comes to going to Pride and waving your flag up, there's a weird contradiction in me, because I've talked about this in my last video, but if I'm standing on my own, I would never talk about being trans. It's not that important to me. However, I recognize, as I've said in previous videos, that living, thriving, existing, and being happy as a Black trans woman is fucking radical. I don't want it to be. I don't think it is. I think that I'm super boring. But I do understand that being on this platform, representing myself and talking about my shit, it's really important and necessary work. And I would like to get to a point where it isn't, because I definitely feel like I'm not as out there as I think some people need. But I know that I'm palatable for a lot of people. I know that a lot of people, they click on my videos, they see me, and they don't think I'm trans. They hear the conversation, and then suddenly they're like, well, I guess trans people are all right, right? And I get that. I do understand that. And that's kind of why I stay on YouTube, is because I know that that's how some people react to me, because I feel a great sense of responsibility. And I think that, you know, going out and waving your flag, it's a big sense of responsibility, because you know what happens when you do that? You're representing to all the people who are afraid to march who they could be. And a lot of people, they want to be that person. And for me, that's why I do this, even though I have my weirdness around, you know, being on here in this context, right? And I'm not saying, oh my God, I feel so thankful that I'm here. Oh my God, I'm not saying that at all, but I'm just pointing out that I've got like this personal weirdness and I guess this professional duty, I suppose. I don't know what this is called. I'm sure that there's a really great phrase for this. And if you know it, please leave it in the comment box. But I think a lot of trans people feel a very deep need to help other trans people, feel a very deep need to help people sort of not have to experience all the various, you know, trials and tribulations that they had to. I would not be where I was had it not been for the trans women before me who wrote extensively about their experiences with hormones and life and changes. I would not be here. And when I was younger, that was a very small community. That was not a very accessible community. That was a community that we found through Yahoo groups and things that, you know, people didn't frequent. It wasn't a YouTube video like this. And so I know that for a lot of trans people, what I'm doing is an impulse. You know, it's this desire to share information so that people who come after us can live easier. And again, that is why I'm here. That is why I'm here, you know? But I guess, does me being on here and being an out trans person, but also not being somebody who always draws attention to my transness in my daily life, does that mean that I don't have pride? I don't know. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this. So I would leave your comment in the comment box below. Let me take a sip before I do my sign out, because girl, I need it. Anyway, as usual, I would love your true tea. Please leave it in the comment box below. I would love your brew. I'm sure it's delicious. What does pride mean to you? Because I think I'm still in the process of figuring it out. I mean, for me, I know that I'm a very proud person. I know that I'm a very proud person, and I have a hard time understanding the read of me where me not saying to everybody that I meet that I'm trans is somehow not being proud. I mean, where I am today, you know, it's 2019. I was really nervous about being a YouTuber, but here we are. We're having this conversation right now. So I don't know, what does pride mean to you? And do you enjoy a gay pride parade? I would love to hear what your thoughts are. So anyway, right now you are watching 2 fun videos that are part of my series True Tea. Click on them if you want to get a new brew, and also always leave your brew in the comment box below. As usual, you can always send me a tip. If you enjoyed this video, that's all in the corner. And yeah, I hope I'll see you guys next week. Tune in to Tuesday, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I would love to see you there. Bye.